Today we're going to talk about a tough subject, a personal subject, alcoholism. I have never been an alcoholic, and I've never been a big drinker in my life. But the amount of people I've been with in my life who have, my family has no alcoholism in it, either side of my family. Closest my family ever got to alcoholism was my grandfather made wine. And towards the last decade of my grandmother's life, she realized that no one was drinking the wine enough to get rid of the bottles, because my grandfather would make like a 5-gallon drum or something. And so she started taking a bottle of wine out every night, and or every other night or whatever, and she'd drink as much as she could. Her and I would have these amazing conversations. I'm mentioning alcoholism for one reason, and that is that I can't seem to escape it. I've either got a close friend who's an alcoholic, I'm either dating an alcoholic, I just can't escape it. And it has to do with the very fabric of everything that's going wrong with the world right now. Alcohol is this false promise of happiness. Alcohol is this take the edge off medicine that supposedly makes what is going wrong in the world right. You know, the slogan of the show is learn the rules that rule you, right? And the thing is that if these people who suffer from alcohol are the exact people that have no idea what the rules are. But they don't like the rules. And so they drink. It's Christmas time. Christmas is in 2 days from this very day. I got a couple shows in the queue. I won't release this right on the holidays, although I should. But this is the time everybody realizes the bullshit promises of life itself. That hard work, you know, for the last 40 years, we've told children that hard work is bullshit. For the last 40 years, the mantra of parenting, the shitty parenting we got out of the baby boomers is, hey, don't let your kids grow up. We're going to let them be kids forever. Kids grow up too fast. What would you know, baby boomers? What would you know about growing up? How's Lee Harvey Oswald doing in your brain? How's Osama bin Laden doing in your brain? There are several flavors of alcoholism. They call it a disease. I'm going to say it's a combination of unfortunate circumstances within someone's genetics and their psyche. Before we even get to the social level of what they've been promised in life and what isn't working out. As you all know, alcoholism, it doesn't care how rich you are, how poor you are. It finds you. Because regardless of where you are, you're within this world that we live in. And time is unforgiving. Time is always there, ebbing forward the next moment of existence. If you're so wealthy you don't need to work, then you need to find something very special to fill your time. You're a normal human being. You've got to work. You've got to sustain a life. You have an ecosystem of going out into the world, doing something for money, and bringing that money home, and then living within the fabric of the boom and bust cycle that is now our planet, because baby boomers have looked the other way for their duration of their life. And unfortunately, we now have a whole new generation of morons getting ready to vote. An over-coddled generation. I don't mean to put this whole thing on the baby boomers' back. Alcoholism is not a baby boomer back problem. The fabric of the world that is putting the pressure on individuals right now has been created by the baby boomers, right? And some evil motherfuckers manipulating their world, lying to them, destroying freedom. The freedom to pursue your own destiny. That's a foundational situation of alcoholism. So let's talk about the the fabric that creates alcoholism within the human body. Then we get to the social level. Because they say it's a disease. That's a bit of a hard pill to swallow. A disease would be something you're either born with or something that is contagious. In the alcoholism that I've seen, I see that as an unrelated situation. A disease, by any definition, does not match what I have experienced in alcoholism. Because I've seen kids grow up completely fine, and then they get their life upside down and they start to drink. But most of it starts from a peer pressure thing. What I always like to tell people that are trying to impress others is that you're trying to impress a non-existent person who doesn't give a shit whether or not you live or die, that you are somehow capable of great things because you're doing whatever you're doing. If that sounds completely confusing, it just means that there is no person out there who gives a fuck about whether or not you drink. They're not impressed if you drink 8 beers. That person doesn't exist. They don't care how many lines of coke you can do. Anybody who cares about that shit is more lost than anyone else you know. And impressing a person who's completely lost, well, that's just an IQ test you're failing. But it eventually turns into addiction. The peer pressure mechanism of impressing people that don't exist turns into a physical dependency. And I think that's where you start to get a diseased mind. But it's not a traditional disease that you catch off somebody or catch off a mosquito. In my experience, it goes something like this. The very first element that must exist to create a really bona fide alcoholic is that the human body, for the individual we're talking about, would be able to process alcohol very, very efficiently. Meaning they can drink like a son of a bitch. And their level of hangover is as mild as perhaps a light cold. When you have that genetic ability, we know some European countries have somehow either manifested it through consuming alcohol for centuries or millennia, or they just simply won the jackpot of this particular capability of metabolized alcohol. For whatever reason, their pH balance stays the same. They don't get dehydrated. Any physical anomalies as a result of thinning their blood doesn't occur, other than being high, of course. And that's the first foundational piece of the game, because it is the single reason why I will never be able to be an alcoholic. I can't drink that much at all, and I'm very pleased to tell you that. You know, some guys say, you can't hold your liquor. Okay, go fuck yourself. I don't care. Dude, my manlyhood is not attached to how much I can thin out my blood and not think correctly. Right? How about when my blood is thick, how good do you think? We throw the inverse impression at you, right? And I like drinking. I personally enjoy the process. I probably will never stop drinking my entire life, but I know when to stop. When I start losing control, I don't want to drink anymore. And especially if I lose the ability to walk correctly, stand up, sit up straight, man, I am done. I am so done. I am pounding soda water and limes all damn night. And coffee if I need it. For whatever reason, soda water just almost counteracts. One 12-ounce soda water for every pint I drink is amazing. It just balances me back out. It's strange. But I get hangovers bad, and I puke. And I don't like puking. Why the fuck would anyone want to taste their internal gastral acids? Why would you want to do that? Why would that be a solution for something? Why would you want to get yourself into the situation by which you would need that solution, right? So for me, it's just process of elimination. Alcohol hits me pretty damn good. I love the taste of gourmet beers and beautiful wines, liqueurs. I mean, I love it, right? But it just hits me so hard. I guess I'm fortunate. I don't have that first thing. All right. So the second thing is a false promise. A false promise that life is going to be something that it never is going to be without amazing hard work. But the false promise is it's just going to happen to you without you doing the hard work, right? Life's a giant lottery ticket. You play one gig, $1 billion, and you're done, like Steve Martin used to say, although he used to say $1 million. He said, I just want one gig, $1 million, I'm done. But when life starts to get hard, people aren't ready. And it's because the expectation hasn't been set properly for them to be ready. And what's interesting about it, and any of you who've ever had a company and you had clients, that setting the expectation of how things are going to go is the magic trick. That is the magic trick of keeping your client happy. As hard as it gets, as amazingly difficult as it gets, or if whatever tragedy you end up bumping into, if you set the expectation that could happen, your client will sit there with folded arms going, okay, yeah, you said that would happen, or it could happen, and then there it is right there. And therefore, if you set your expectations in life properly, it's going to be okay. When I moved to California, for instance, I could have found myself in a fairly good rationale for drinking alcohol all the time. I was by myself. I had plenty of money after I got a job. I moved here with $236 and I had to spend $100 of that just to put gas in the tank just to drive here. So about $140 roughly when I arrived. But I got a job really quick. I wasn't stupid. I set one up before I came. But what I told myself when I came out here in my car, I had a Dodge Charger, 1976 Dodge Charger with all the fucking problems I've talked about. I told myself, well, I will live in my car. If I got to sleep in my back seat, I had bench seats, I had bench seats. It was probably pretty damn comfortable. I definitely had plenty of sex in that car. A little TMI for you. But I didn't have to because I played my cards right. But I also set my expectations that I had to work my ass off, and that's exactly what I did. And so life was a lot better than I ever imagined because I set my expectations really low, that it was going to be tough. I got lucky. And I had no mentorship at all. Everybody wanted me to fail from my hometown, including my parents and my grandparents. It's not that they were wanting me to actually fail. They wanted me to come home and be with them, to live a whole life next to them. And believe me, I wish I could have. But as soon as expectations aren't set in a child, and the child has a whimsical ability to usurp expectations out of commercials, out of movies, out of hearsay. And let me ask you, how many times have you sat at a bar, sat at a restaurant, sat in a group setting, and someone was talking about the tragedy of another person, and you applied that to your life? I think as you get older, you start to do that. But when you're young, you don't. You want to hear about the lottery ticket guy. Oh, my buddy got a job at this, junk bonds place, and he made $100 million. His boss went to jail, but he got to keep his $100 million. And these young kids are like, "Oh man, I just need to find me a milk, and I'm gonna go make me $100 million." And then that one investment, very low effort, very low risk in their brain, and they're gonna make all that money, and it's gonna be the way it works. And as soon as they have to get an 8-hour day job and work 2 extra hours, 3 nights a week for no extra pay, they start to realize that that's what life might be like. People that get pregnant too soon. Sometimes it works out completely and you're fine. Other times it can hit you 10 years later. You're like, man, I lost my childhood. I lost my teenage years, or my 20s, raising kids. And in the end, you actually got to move kids into the world when your body was the healthiest it could have possibly been, making yourself extremely healthy children, which will reduce your investment later on. But you also get your life back sooner. So in your 30s, you get to go off and do your new destiny, or even if you're in your 40s. But some people are having kids in their late 30s, and they're going to spend their 30s and 50s raising these kids. And that's maybe where they want to be in their life, right? It's all about expectations and what you want out of life. But once the train starts going off the rail of your expectations, life starts to be a different thing every day that you wake up. The theme of deep thoughts, okay. At least 2/3 of all the shows that I've done so far, are helping to set your expectations properly, but give you the tools and the understanding of society and yourself to avoid any of the necessity to introduce an alcohol into your system as a matter of dependency of existence. And, quite frankly, you could be an alcoholic today watching any one of these episodes, and it starts to give you the tools to climb out of the hole. It's a 12-video program and not a 12-step program. So let's talk about what alcohol does to the body, because it's sort of a hidden secret of what alcohol does to the body. And I know I'm smoking a cigar, okay? Cigars are way different than cigarettes. They're not made of paper. They don't have 1,200 to 1,500 chemicals added to them. You don't inhale them. Tobacco does go into your bloodstream, which is where you get lightheaded. I don't smoke anything super duper heavy. And it does make a difference when the tobacco is very, very strong, then your blood is getting diluted very quickly. But I don't take any risks where I don't have to take risks when it comes to cancer. I don't put a lot of crap in my body. I eat organic most of the time. I take supplements that help my immune system stay on top. And when I drink alcohol, I know that I'm risking things, but then again, I don't pound my body with it. Let's talk about alcohol in the human body. Most of you know that a liver is the first thing that gets pulverized by alcohol. It's more fundamental than I think we're taught. As soon as alcohol hits the liver tissue begins to die. And it's just a one-to-one correlation of you introduce alcohol and then you kill your liver, parts of it. I believe there's a regeneration rate that your body can heal those damaged cells. But if you drink every single day, your liver's never going to be able to keep up. It doesn't matter if it's a beer, doesn't matter if it's a thing of wine, doesn't matter if it's hard alcohol. Any derivative of alcohol, even NyQuil back in the day that used to have 25% alcohol or something, it was like proof or something. Had some pretty good juice in it when I was a kid, man. That's why it used to work. It'll nail you. The next one up is that it thins your blood. That's why you get high. The neurons in your mind require thick red blood in order to function. I believe it's the oxygenated blood that your brain uses. I could be wrong, but it needs blood. It needs a thick, healthy blood. When you thin out your blood, your neurons no longer communicate properly, which is why you get lightheaded and why you get dizzy, tipsy, and drunk. As you try to walk across the room, your body is simply so polluted that your autonomic system can't perform the function of walking anymore. And what should be a terrifying experience for you in terms of, wow, I've got my body in such a horrible state, it can't walk, becomes a novelty due to films, due to culture, due to people who sell it in the first place. Again, I think you'll find that most responsible adults, they don't get that far. They start to feel a little bit of the dizziness of being tipsy, and they sort of back off at that point. And a lot of people will understand their body weight, and they will simply pace it properly so that they think, okay, I'm going to be here for 4 or 5 hours. This is how I'm going to roll. For me personally, I like to get in and get a drink in me really fast. I will not pound it, I'm not trying to drink quickly, but I will drink it much quicker than normal just to get up to my sort of minimum tipsiness. And then I will sip a drink very slowly over an hour. If there's ice cubes in it, those ice cubes will be melted by the time I'm done. And that's how I roll. But then that night when I'm pissing about 3 o'clock in the morning due to waking up due to dehydration, I feel it in my head. And that's when I tell God that I may never drink again. At a minimum, I tell myself, what the hell were you thinking? But this thinning of your blood has a couple things that it does to you. First thing it does is it kills your brain cells that actually need blood to exist. Now, as I've said several times on several shows, you do grow brain cells until the day you die. The reason why I thought you didn't create brain cells was they couldn't figure out how it worked, because it didn't do the mitosis suitcase dividing animation in the brain. Now they simply tell you don't create brain cells because the companies that are supposedly monitoring your health regimen like the FDA and the CDC, They know that they have greenlit so many toxic chemicals that you ingest that by the age of 40, your body starts to really go downhill. Your body's absolutely packed with toxins. And they try to tell you that your repeating yourself regimen is due to some natural attrition in the brain. I'm going to tell you that's bullshit on a massive scale. All these celebrity guys I talk about that are my friends, they don't repeat themselves. And they're from the age of 57 to 81. And they don't repeat themselves. And they don't repeat themselves for one very specific reason. They keep their minds fresh. Probably two reasons. And they don't toxify themselves that much. They live very simple lives. But the other thing that thinning your blood does to you is that it makes the veins and your arteries in your body conform to the need that the blood demands. What does that mean? Well, depending on how much you drink. And I'll tell you this much, alcoholics lie about how much booze they drink. And they lie constantly about it. They push you out of their life so they can go have an event to drink. But they'll say it's a different reason. Maybe they don't really tell you a lie. They just don't tell you all the truth. They usually hide alcohol around the house. If you're on their ass and you live with them, they'll hide something off in a cupboard somewhere. And of course, you can smell it on them. I haven't really had that problem personally. But I've had family members of mine that I was dating into that had that problem big time. But this thinning of your blood thins your arteries and thins your veins. And eventually it begins to interrupt the ability of your body to communicate with itself in terms of an immune system that heals you. Remember, your immune system travels in your blood. So the thinner your blood is, the more you're going to get sick in general. Your body's going to continue to go downhill. If you have cancer in your body due to negligence of a different kind, well, it's going to eventually make it into your future. It's going to eventually rob you of your future. I have a family member that goes through my daughter's side of the family. And her grandmother died at 53 years old due to catastrophic organ failure related to the thinning of her arteries and her veins due to chronic alcoholism that had gone on for 30 years. She actually, at the end, God bless her heart, stopped drinking. And she went cold turkey. And she started eating well. And she must have lost, 60 pounds, and she was 5 foot tall. She had completely re-engineered her life in a way that any one of you would be unbelievably proud of her. But her reward at the end of the game was that when thick blood started to pump through her veins, everything stopped. She sat in a bed for 2 months, never leaving the bed for the last 2 weeks. And I think most of you know that there's something we need to do on a daily basis. And didn't happen for her for 2 weeks, and she passed away in that bed. Right when her granddaughter was born. She didn't have a chance to really meet her. I mean, my daughter was probably two or something. But what I learned at that point was that this blood thinning thing is so chronic that you can't just go cold turkey. You need a therapy to get off of alcohol to give your veins and your arteries a chance to maybe reconstitute and stretch out again. How would that be? I mean, that you would be a drinker for 30 years and you go to a alcohol clinic and they say, okay, you're going to have to continue drinking for the next 10 years. And this is your regimen of drinking that you have to do. Your prescription in this alcoholic hospital is to continue drinking until you taper it off, because we're going to get your veins and your arteries stretched back out again. A lot of people who have heart failure, who are chronic drinkers, they can't find a vein or an artery in the body that can be transposed into the heart cavity to save their lives, and so they die. And these people are innocent people, and they're not evil people. Alcoholics aren't evil people. They're victims of society trying to struggle and deal with what's going on around them. as the false expectations continue to total into their life or subtotal into their life, they're trying to deal. And once they accidentally pull the thread out of the sweater, right? Life can collapse on top of them. As a parent, you don't want to. As a parent, you don't want to let the world turn into a pile of shit that your kid has to experience. But as soon as you grow up, you do realize very quickly that you don't have control over it. And this is why MK Ultra Radio exists, why the show exists, is to try and, on a subliminal level, control it. To ebb and make everything different. There's a show called Walking Dead on AMC. And I'm rewatching it with my girlfriend. It's actually pretty fantastic the second time. And there's a woman, Carol, in the show who ends up having to take care of a couple kids. A couple little girls. And they're not ready for this new apocalyptic world. At least one of them isn't. Badly. And at one point, the Carol character just simply says, "You're weak. I need to tell you the truth. You're weak, and you're going to die if you don't become strong." No parent wants to tell a child that. Now, there are ways of telling a child that in a non-apocalyptic world that is much softer to the consciousness of a child. But you need to say something. If we're not going to be able to change the world tomorrow, we have to say things to our kids to set their expectations. And we also have to be able to say it from adult to adult. A lot of times, adults just need to hear one thing. And I try to say this all the time on everything that I record, which is, it is really, it does get this hard, guys, girls. It does get this hard. But here's the good thing. This episode's about getting you out of that hardship. And then I go on about whatever topic I'm talking about, hopefully. But alcoholism is like it's almost a little, too little too late sometimes feeling when you find someone who is already embedded in alcoholism. Because in the end, you really don't know when it started. You almost never know unless it's a family member and you saw something occur. Now, there's expectations in life that grow on you slowly, like, hey, you're going to be able to go to college and for 4 years and get out and get a job. All these millennial kids are coming out with $125,000 debts, and there's no work, and their degree is absolutely pointless. And the college that sold them that piece of shit degree has no accountability whatsoever. And their state and their government that has created this huge loan program that has influenced all the colleges to raise their rates has no accountability whatsoever. And so you can imagine someone crawling into a bottle. But sometimes shit just happens. Life is good. Everything is working out fine. And then something happens. The grandmother I just talked about, her story for her whole life. One, I think she had a fairly bizarre upbringing because the family was very violent, extremely violent. The men beat up the women in this family. It's fucked up, right? Of course, you don't know this until after you have a child with that family. But that didn't affect my little small circle. My small circle was good. But what ends up happening is, but this woman had her brother die, who was really young, and her father die, all within 12 months. It was her protector. The brother that passed away was her protector against the rest of the family. Her father was her hero, and she lost both of them. And the only thing that was left were the ones that were abusive, as I understand it. And she crawled into a bottle, and she never stopped drinking. This woman would drink. She'd mix up a screwdriver in the morning, and then I had to be careful because my kid might think it's orange juice. And go taking a huge swig of a mouth of vodka at 2.5 years old, right? I don't know if that ever really happened, but I could see it happening, right? But she also had that gene that could process the living shit out of alcohol. She never had a hangover. She could just drink. And then she lost her life to it. But that was the expectation of randomness that wasn't set, that shit can happen. Shit does always happen. Always expect the unexpected in life. And that's sort of how I live my life. And I got a baptism by fire by moving to California at 17 without any parent with me, without any friends with me. I had to say that anything can happen, and I took it all the way down to traffic, because I was driving in Los Angeles traffic, having driven only in the Midwest in my entire lifetime. And not that Midwest driving isn't dangerous as hell on 2-lane roads, but it's aggressive out here, and luckily I was a pretty aggressive driver. So so the last thing that this does to you, as you all know, is dehydrates the shit out of you. Alcohol displaces moisture in your body, and you get dehydrated. That's why we all wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, just wide awake. And what you need to do is pound the living shit out of water. If you're like most of us, a couple Excedrin. And if you drink too much, you need to puke. Puking is a great idea if you're drunk, because you get all that toxin out of your system. If it's still in your gut, you can puke it out. Man, you just had a victory, because now it won't hit your liver. Now it won't hit your brain. Now it won't hit your bloodstream. Now it won't mess with your veins. And you'll survive. The people that run the world are well aware that when we experience repression, there must be relief valves for that repression that doesn't point back to them. And, if you've seen all my episodes, I talk about the Colosseum that Titus Flavius created. The Colosseum being the major distraction for society. When you're unhappy, you'll focus on other people's unhappiness, and you'll watch a Christian get pulled apart by a lion in a Colosseum. You'll see gladiators go at it. And today it's just sports. Today it's TMZ, celebrity hating. Today it is crawling into a bottle. That's what's really going on. And it doesn't point back to the source of the repression. Now, if you watch this show, you'll know that we know the source of the repression. Everything that happens in the world, I always tell people, the only thing that really truly affects you in the world is economy. That's really where it's at. You can live your own little life in your own little neighborhood, completely autonomous from all this stuff. Pretty ebb and flow. If there's a tornado goes through your house and kills your neighbor, well, that's just Mother Nature, as long as chemtrails didn't make it happen. Same thing with a hurricane. But everything else is just sort of random nature, earthquakes, all that stuff. But when the repression comes down to the point you don't have enough money to do what you need to do, it starts to hit the pavement really quick. The fastest way a couple starts to have a problem is to start to have money problems. Money problems, well, where do those come from? Those come from education that is subpar, that opportunities that are subpar. Hell, you could be a genius at something that's useful, right? But the powers of the world aren't rotating the investment capital into those regions of business, and you can't get a job. I was in the .com industry at the very beginning. 1996, I was a full-fledged internet programmer, website artist. Hell, I used 3D packages and Photoshop to make some of the coolest websites, animated stuff you've ever seen in your life, plus the code underneath it to make it all flow, because I was on both sides of the fence equally. By the time I helped build EA.com, my skills were insane. I knew the front end, the back end, the architecture, from the database to everything. I was one of the best internet engineers / artists on planet Earth. And at 2002, we had the .com bust. And it was this unfathomable collapse in the online industries. If you take inventory of the world at the time, and I'm just going to tell you this because it's an expectation that shouldn't have, or an opportunity that shouldn't have fizzled out, but it was part of their ebb and flow of boom and bust. And because they wanted to start a war as a result of 9/11 in 2003, they needed a bunch of ghetto kids with absolutely no future. And in doing so, they had to kill markets that were very lucrative and easy to get into. And the internet still remains the easiest technical discipline you can learn. The languages are friendly. With a little bit of knowledge, you can do a lot of stuff and make a fair amount of money in a vacuum, right? You could have a laptop in a coffee shop and make, $500 a day easy, right? But they collapsed the internet industry so bad that even though 80% of the world was not on the internet in any way, shape, or form, all those mom and pop shops in the world were on the internet, and even the big giant corporations in the world who were technically on the internet had the worst interfaces. Half of them didn't have e-commerce capabilities, so they couldn't take your money yet because they hadn't figured out their merchant account with their banking organization, despite how many billions of dollars they might be worth in a market cap analysis. My employees, which were 55 in number, plus of the other 200 that I knew in other departments, plus myself, plus my managers, couldn't find jobs to save our soul for at least a year. I left Electronic Arts, I believe, April 1st, 2002. And I didn't have solid employment until I created my own company in 2005. And it was absurd. It was the single most in-demand business imperative to be on the internet if you wanted to exist in the future. In the 21st century, you must be online. But you couldn't get people to part with their money. It was crazy. And they'd spend $2,500 a month on Yellow Page ads, which nobody was looking at. And you're saying, look, for $2,500, maybe $5,000 total, we can get you on the internet and a website with a website capable of being maintained by you without a coder. You can put all your products on there, your inventory, and sell it. For $5,000, you'll have the most incredible Yellow Pages on planet Earth forever with your credible domain, because we haven't, they all hadn't been bought up yet. I'm sure the dot-com bust created plenty of alcoholics, right? So what if you struggle with this, or you know someone who does? Well, at the last second, I was going to cover a completely different subject, and today it just got to the point where I was like, I need to talk about this. Coming from a household that didn't have drinking much, because again, I think my family all gets affected pretty badly. We don't have the gene that processes alcohol that well. And that's probably what kept us out of the game forever. I have a crap ton of aunts and uncles, and none of them got into it. They just can't, Part of it is there's a skill for, because I haven't been an alcoholic. The challenge I have in trying to create a big solution is that I have pulled people out of this, but it took me 10, 15 years to do it. It took a lot of hard work and a lot of suffering on my part in dealing with alcoholism in general and dealing with their tirades, Because it used to be that a person would drink all frickin' year long, and you'd have, at least a quarterly explosion in this person's personality, where something would happen that was sort of unforgivable. But being the person I am, I did forgive and move on. And then it would go down to twice a year, then once a year. But each one of these explosions seemed to get more profound and more violent and more acidic and horrible. And so I learned the hard way of how to deal with alcoholics. So if you're dealing with someone and you're not an alcoholic and you've never been exposed to it before, let me just give you a little bit of advice, okay? The toughest thing to do is figure out whether or not someone is truly an alcoholic. You have to learn about their past in order to figure out if they are. How often does this occur? If you live with them, well, you'll find out fairly soon. And then you have the added challenge of how do you deal with it? My biggest mistake I ever made was had a girlfriend on a New Year's who I think she pounded about 1.5 bottles of wine and was still trying to suck down a goblet after I Ubered all my friends home. This is in 1998 to 99 New Year's. I always wanted my 1999 New Year's to be huge because I was a Prince fan. I thought, man, that'd be really cool to jam and just have a good time. It was one of the worst nights of my entire life. And my girlfriend had too much to drink, and I took all my friends home who were they were pretty lit, but they got home okay. And I came home, and my girlfriend was on the phone with her friend, and she was slurring so much on this phone that I knew that anyone on the other side of the phone could not make out what this girl was saying. And she had this big goblet of wine, brand new. I'm sitting there going, fuck me, you can't speak the English language and you're about to yank down the deepest pour I've ever seen anyone pour into a glass, right? And so I asked her to get off the phone. I said, come on, let's clean up. She couldn't hear me. I mean, she just was not in my world. Now I was an idiot, right? I was really in my late 20s, and it's like, I just never dealt with alcoholism before. And so I went into the kitchen, and I sort of just hung up the phone off on the kitchen side. And then I waited for her to try to figure it out that she wasn't talking to anybody on her end. And I'm starting to clean up. But I come out into the front room, and this goblet of wine is now on the floor. And it's a white carpet. I'm renting this house. And just red wine, boom, all over the floor. And a switch flipped in me that was like, I am done with this bullshit. I am done with putting up with this fucking drunk bullshit. And so I pick up the glass, and I take the phone out of her hand slowly, and I'm like, you're not talking to anybody, for one. And look at this. Look what you did. And, of course, accountability starts to hit the alcoholic. And, of course, they have justification for whatever they're doing in their brain. And she ends up exploding into this violent woman. And she starts, yelling at me, that's all my fault. I'm just like, whatever, man. I'm paying all the bills, and you just, you're trying to get your life together and let you get your life started, and I'm helping you. And it was obviously incompatibility between the two of us, but it turned into like this, me just sort of standing back and, going, oh my God, the devil just arrived in this woman. And she went down the hallway and slammed the door to the bedroom. And I was a little worried. Not that there's anything she could hurt herself with. I wasn't a gun owner at the time. But I want to make sure she was okay. And so I go up to the door and I try to open it. And it's locked. I'm like, fuck me. So I kick the door open. And she's in there. And so I just stand at the door. I'm like, you're fine. This is cool. Why don't you lie down and just sleep it off, and I'll get the house cleaned up. And, of course, being aggressive on the door, she just started coming at me and physically attacking me, right? And she weighs nothing. Maybe $120, soaking wet. She's about my height, but just really thin. And so I after she started kicking me a bunch, I grabbed her arms and I just pushed her on the bed. And she falls on the bed. And then she sort of just gives up completely, but she starts sobbing and crying because she's just fucked in the head. And then she starts rolling on the bed. I'm just watching her. She starts rolling towards the end of the bed. And I didn't think, I wasn't going to put my hands on her because things just got really violent, and I'm not used to, I had never had a woman in my life ever remotely become violent towards me in my lifetime. And I've had some pretty knockdown, drag out arguments with at least one other girlfriend in my lifetime. And it's really funny. It's like you either have someone you date that argues with you, or you have someone that you never argue with. I've only had 2 women in my life that I ever argued with, and she was the last one. But she ends up rolling off the end of the bed and doesn't realize she's rolling off the bed. So she hits her face on this hardwood floor, and she popped her lip open. And I didn't realize it at first, but she then touches her face, and she's like, you punched me in the face, you busted my lip. And I'm like, oh my God. At this point, this drunk chick could call the cops and tell her that I punched her in the face, right? I'm like, fuck me. So I just stood there. The whole time I stood there, and I wasn't going to be able to approach her. And now there's like little droplets of blood on the ground, but it stopped pretty quick, but it was enough to look horrible, right? So I just stood there for hours and hours and hours, probably 3 hours. And I changed the mood of the conversation. I calm everything down. I may have gone in and cleaned up the house a little bit, but I don't really remember doing that. About 4 o'clock, she starts sobering up enough that she realizes this whole thing is just her in a bottle. And I get her in bed, and she starts puking. And I had this, this trash can off to the side. And she's puking just red clay, whatever the hell she ate. And I didn't know that alcohol poisoning is potentially fatal. And I should have probably taken her to an ER. But she puked for the next 14 hours. I had 2 trash cans, and I kept just throwing them out in this compost I had out back. It was awful. And I wasn't smart enough to give her, I think I gave her water, but it wasn't like you must drink water because you were dehydrated and you could just simply seize up and die. So if you're dealing with anybody who's puking a lot for hours and hours and hours due to alcohol poisoning, be smart. Well, one, give them tons of water. Give them those couple Excedrin. They might puke them up, unfortunately, but at least water. Water's going to give them a major fucking headache, right? And there's this whole theory of the hair of the dog that bit you. If you wake up with the hangover, you drink more alcohol, and you won't feel so horrible. And it works, but look at where we're taking the disease at that point, right back into the disease, right? All to feel better. I think that cause and effect, you let them feel horrible, and then they remember next time they even smell alcohol, they start to remember the puking, remember the hangover, and they tend to stop. But an alcoholic, for whatever reason, will forget. They map the consequences of drinking out of their system, so they're ready for the next drink. And the thing that sucks is if you're a moderate drinker and a responsible drinker and you hang out with an alcoholic that's recovering, then you can't drink. You really can't. Not in their presence. It's offensive. And you really can't go to places where alcohol is served because they're sitting there in the den of temptation. And it really, really sucks. Because I've tried to coexist with people that were alcoholics and they had stopped. And then we go out and they obviously, there's that one moment. The other thing that happens in an alcoholic is there's the one drink that's too much. And they go in thinking, I'm only going to have a drink or two drinks. And then that whatever that last one they allowed themselves to have is the one that took them over the edge, over the precipice, and they're right back in where they started, drinking infinitely until they simply seize up. And usually turn into the devil. Now there's happy drunks and there's angry drunks. I am not an angry drunk because I remain sentient. No matter how drunk I am, I remember everything and I'm sentient, right? I might feel like shit. I might tell you I feel like shit, but I won't attack you in any way, shape, or form. But let's think about an angry drunk. An angry drunk is becoming angry because the human body is completely under attack. It's being assaulted by a deprivation of thick blood that allows the brain to function properly. So the body will go into a feral defense mechanism, right? The dog protecting his food sort of mentality. As well, all of the expectations in life that are driving this disease, driving this consumption, start to surface. And they will metaphorically get mapped onto everyone that they love, everything that they love. And they start to destroy everything around them. And once you realize it's not going to stop, you got a problem on your hands. You can never, ever, ever be with an alcoholic and tell yourself that you only got a couple more times left and then they're going to stop. You don't know if they're ever going to stop. You have to make some tough decisions because once you pull this disease into your life, you are dealing with chaos constantly. And let me tell you, it's no fun. And some of you know this firsthand. Some of you may be struggling with this personally, right? It used to be you could get a job in this world. Well, one, you could get an education about how to do a job, get the job, and keep it your whole life with the pension. The only area I know this exists in the United States of America is within the educational system. If you never engage real life, and you go back inside the educational system, and you get inside of a teacher's union, there's a big fat paycheck for you, and there's a big fat pension for you. There's free insurance, and it's paid for by the citizens of the United States of America. The same goes for political jobs, but those are so rare that I can't really say, yeah, go become a politician, right? Anyone who becomes a politician in the United States of America gets a pension for the rest of their life and free health care for the rest of their life. And that health care is not the same health care that we have to purchase as a mandate of existence here. The draconian Obamacare, they don't have to purchase because it's all given to them for free for the rest of their lives. So you can do 2 years as a senator. You have a big fat survivable income for the rest of your life and free health care for the rest of your life paid for by the citizens of this country. Well, 325 million of the rest of us have to work our asses off within the boom and bust economy. So the phenomenon that is occurring now, more than ever, that is feeding alcoholism is that by the time you hit 40, it ain't working out. It ain't working out anymore for some people, right? I've known people that are alcoholics that have had the same job their entire life for 30 years, and it's not going away. Well, it will go away, but they'll have skills enough to go into another job of a similar kind, so there's really no threat. But the job doesn't pay that much. It certainly doesn't have a lot of, auxiliary income to have fun. So you're always scrimping, living in little cracker boxes. And you start to look at your life and say, Jesus, I've got 20 more years of life. Even if I have a short life, I'll die in my 60s, right? And that's still a very short life. And so alcohol becomes a patch on the end of this thing. I know some people in their 40s and 50s that hang out with people in their 20s and early 30s so they can always stick with the group that is still being indoctrinated by alcohol, so that their lifestyle in their 40s, it completely overlays with the typically irresponsible, still figuring out life sector of the 20s, or again, maybe early 30s. And they do this strategically so that there's no difference in the way that they behave and their friends that they hang out with. Meanwhile, their friends at their peak peer level have gone off and gotten, real jobs that have normal incomes. They live in normal size homes. They don't party all the time. They don't go to every single event that they can get their hands on. They live in the real world. And they thus keep these events very special in their life. They keep a drink special in their life and not as this regimen of blood supply. They don't have a bad day, come home and knock out a drink to cool off their tension. They deal with the tension. They let the tension set in. They let the tension be the mother of invention to go get something else in life, to get that extra education. I'm not judging anybody for not being able to deal with these problems, because it's all based on what your expectations were set like when you were a kid. And it's not your fault if you were constantly told it was going to be okay and it didn't turn out in your definition of being okay. Now, any citizen in America, on average, I'd say 98% of all the citizens in America, we live a charmed life compared to the rest of the world. We simply do. We have rights that other countries don't have. We can go buy guns. We can buy a gun. We're one of the last places on planet Earth that is civilized first world that you can buy a gun to protect yourself against a government that might rise up against you. Europe can't. Australia can't. Right? China can't. Mexico can't. Canada, I don't know, I'm sure where they are with their guns. But they've all talked themselves out of these things, right? So if you're an American, you got a lot of sweet things available to you, right? But this being tired in the 40s, being tired of working your ass off and not actually having a destiny or the American dream ahead of you is where we're at. And that's why socialists are so popular nowadays. The bullshit promise that more taxes are somehow going to free you to do everything that you want in life is utterly absurd. Whatever money you make will be absolutely pulled out of existence by the government if socialism ever takes off in this country. The more social tits that you suck in this world, the more that they get to control every aspect of your life, because to conform to a socialist society, you have to agree to the rules of the socialistic system. First it'll be these kids that have never fired a gun who are terrified of guns. It's usually the people who say, why do you need a gun? The second someone says, why do you need a gun? You say, how many guns have you fired in your lifetime? Not a shotgun, a pistol, an AR-15, an assault rifle. A rifle with a scope on it. How many times have you fired a weapon and just lost your fear of it and felt the power of sovereignty, of freedom? That if anybody tries to take away your freedom or threaten you, you have at least a mechanism to defend yourself, whether it be a burglar or troops, But I think we all know that alcohol is just a distraction. It's a delay. And the weird thing is if you're struggling with life, the idea that introducing alcohol into that life is somehow going to make ends meet, which is what people think it does, right? It's crazy. It doesn't work out. There's a lot of celebrities that became alcoholics and died of liver poisoning, and they lost, they had liver transplants, so they got in line for a liver transplant, and they couldn't get the liver in time, and they die. Or a bunch of these celebrities back in the 80s were all these old-time baseball players who drink to the point their livers exploded, and they got preferential treatment, pushed to the front of the line because they were celebrities, and everybody who allocates livers were fans of these guys, and took people that had true liver failure due to non-alcoholic self-abuse reasons and pushed them to the back of the line while these celebrities got the livers, and then these guys continued to drink and kill the new liver and die. This happened all through the 80s when I was a kid. And even as a child, I knew that was bullshit. That slowed down a bit in America. I don't have the smoking gun for helping an alcoholic. On one level, I want to tell you, be very, very careful surrounding yourself by them in any intimate way. A close circle of friends that are alcoholics. It's that old saying that they said that, my mom told me when I was a kid. She goes, people who are unhappy will only drag you down. They can't drag you up. People who are unhappy usually have very deep rudimentary problems that are deeply embedded in their life. And you're not going to be their knight in shining armor to get them out of it. You just won't be. I've dated a woman that was clinically depressed, and I didn't understand that was a condition that could happen. And we would be having the greatest morning of our life, and we'd leave the apartment and go somewhere. It had nothing to do with alcohol. But I'd look over in the passenger seat of the car, and my girlfriend would be just sobbing. Just utterly sobbing. And I said, what's wrong? And through her crying tears, she would say, I don't know. I was like, God damn, what am I going to do? I love this person. I live with this person. What am I going to do? And it didn't work out in the end. And I can only hope that now she's fine. I hope she married a guy, and I think she's been married to him for over 20 years. And I just hope that that's working out beautifully, But alcoholism, we don't like to talk about too, right? If we are alcoholics, we definitely don't talk about it. What I have discovered in alcoholism is that the alcohol is defended as if it was a child that the person had, whether they're a man or a woman. They feel like it's their puppy, it's their loved one. And if you think for any split second you can get an alcoholic to choose you over alcohol, you are sadly mistaken. It doesn't happen very often. If anyone chooses a human being over alcohol when they're an alcoholic, man, you are talking to a very tough individual who is very centered and very capable of getting perspective very quickly. Hasn't been my experience at all. At least not over. I had one person pretty much stop drinking excessively, but it took 15 years of me living my life, being moderate with it, and that person crashing and burning and creating regretful moments with me that she'll never take back. Saying things that she knows were, well, one, she wouldn't remember what she did the previous night. So I said, I would wake up the next day, or let a couple days go by, and I'd say, do you remember what you said? And she goes, no. And I said, well, sit down, because you're going to hear everything that you said. Because this demon that's inside of you, I used to think had a leg to stand on, and now you're just being belligerent and mean for no reason, and you're inventing things that don't exist. And I think it was the very last time, it was my birthday. Maybe 4 years ago. I'm no longer with this person, but 4 years ago, this person drank too much on my birthday with some friends that I barely knew. We had to drag her out of a nightclub in LA. She couldn't walk across the street. Put her in the passenger seat of my car, and she just sort of fell asleep. I was like, this is awesome. We got an hour drive home. Probably 15 minutes before we get to the house, this chick wakes up and starts to become the devil. Goes for extremely personal things that have no merit whatsoever, just making up shit, but just was trying to get murdered or something. I don't know what the deal was, right? And I've dealt with some girlfriends of my buddies that tried to do the same thing. But I was sort of used to it, and so I fed into it for a split second until I realized, oh shit, I'm doing that. I'm exacerbating the situation. So eventually got home, put her to bed. Of course, the next day everything is forgotten, right? And at least in her brain. But it was through sheer embarrassment and regretful moments that this girl stopped. But it took dozens of these experiences to finally pull her head out and get rid of it. And I can say to this day, I think that she's maintained her sobriety to the point where she can drink now, and it is controlled. But I've also known and dated people that couldn't admit it, never wanted to hear the big A word pointed at them. And so you have a choice at that point. You're dating a person, you don't realize it at first. They say, hey, you want a drink? And you're like, yeah, sure, man, let's have a drink. It's our first date. Let's chill out and be together. And then you realize that maybe even with you, it's silly and it's fun. You go to bed and it's great. And then you go to a party and boom, the shit hits the fan and they drink way too much. And I've even had a person who drank too much that was never unhappy, really. But you get home and they fall asleep in 2 seconds. And then, they have a bad day at work, and then they come home and they're mixing a drink 5 seconds after coming in the room. And they literally said to me once, I've heard this more recently than I'd like to admit, I just had a really bad day at work and I need this drink. And I was always told that an alcoholic will do two things: drink when they're by themselves, to extreme, and drink as a result of work or stress. And just overtly admit it, right? For me, because I have such an ill effect, an ill result as a result of drinking alcohol, it's never worked out for me. I even went through my phase of drinking liqueurs at night. Let's put a little on, just put a dinky amount, like 1/4 inch in a glass with ice and drink that. But then I'd wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning taking a piss with a swimming head, or at least the remnants of a 5-minute hangover. And it was enough. It was like, this doesn't, it's going to ruin my day. And I'm like, now I've got shitty sleep. And it's just, why? I got a destiny. I know what I want to do with my life, whether or not it makes me money to set me free or it just makes my heart feel good. I don't want to interfere with that destiny. And the more you exacerbate and embed yourself with real opportunities in the world, you can't afford to have anything interrupt those things, right? And I've been very, very lucky. I've actually went out and drank with a friend of mine, which was, a remote thing, but we went out and drank too much, and I came home and, I had sober enough to get in my car and be illegal, but because it hits me so much that I remember working several hours after I came home, and I went to bed, and then the next day I signed a deal that was amazing in my life, right? And made my company quite a bit of money. But I got lucky on that day. And it's not something I'm going to, this whole thing of work hard, play hard, well, that's cool. But try not to make alcohol the way that you play hard. That's just my advice, right? Being friends with 80s rockers who were able to go into all kinds of levels of abuse and alcohol and drugs, and they all came out of it, but they all suffered those slings and arrows that they always tell you about. I always think to myself, why is it that peasants of the world like me think that they can go into this world and somehow beat what these celebrities who have done mountains of drugs and mountains of alcohol and screwed up their lives have done to their lives? Why do people think they can actually be the one that wins the lottery in alcohol and make it through? It never works out, people. It never, ever works out. You either die really, really early, or you lose a lot of people out of your life due to it. You lose opportunities out of your life. And if you're drinking because you're unhappy, you ain't seen nothing yet, man. I guess the only solution I can really throw at anyone watching this would be, please watch more of these. Please help yourself however you can. Read a book, talk to friends. Maybe it isn't a cold turkey thing. I don't think you even have to feel bad not doing a cold turkey turnoff. Again, if you've been drinking for 30, 40 years, I don't know if you want to drink. I don't know if you want to go to cold turkey. You need to get checked out by your doctor so you don't shock your body the opposite direction and die due to thick blood, I think there's two sides to the being embedded with an alcoholic. And I'll say that I probably dated 4 alcoholics. And of course, you never know until you start. Then you fall in love with them. And everything will be perfect except for that one goddamn thing. And then what do? You have to rip your heart out to be free. I used to think that, hey man, if I dealt with something a lot in my life, that I'd be really good at dealing with it again. And it's like, oh, you're an alcoholic? Hey, no problem, man. I've totally dealt with alcoholics. This is what we're going to do. ... And I've never done that because it doesn't work. Or you tell yourself, well, I've dealt with alcoholism. I know how to look the other way. That doesn't work either. But there's 2 ways you get into a relationship with an alcoholic. You date them and you can leave them. Or you date them, marry them, have children with them, and find out the hard way. I've dated an alcoholic that was living in some form of denial about herself. And when she finally dealt with the denial, she stopped drinking. That's luck of the draw, man. That's nothing you can base your life on, right? There's no one solution you can just utter over a kitchen table and all of a sudden they stop drinking. It doesn't happen like that, right? But I got to a point in my life where, I'm going to tell you one thing because I keep thinking it while I'm talking to you, but I keep finishing what I'm saying. What I'm going to tell you is that I've made a decision not to deal with this shit anymore. But I was dating someone more recently, and she said to me once, we're coming home, and she said, I've never seen you drunk. And I just said, in my standard Mark Lowe fashion, I said, yeah, because I'm over 40 years old. And responsible adults don't get drunk. And if there's any arbitrary point in time that I believe that you should be an adult, if you're not one by 40, you have fucked up. If you're not willing to be an adult by 40 and deal with all the things in life that suck and mitigate them and get through them, or at least get a plan for them, or at least acknowledge the problems in life at 40, you got some work to do. Doesn't matter if you're late to the game. You could be 48 and you're late to the game, but at least you're trying, But I said that sort of flippantly. I meant it. But at that point, I finally put a stake in my own mind, and I said, if you're over 40 getting routinely drunk, you're an alcoholic. It's just that simple. And something is wrong. You might think it's just the most euphoric thing in the world, especially if you don't have any hangover or much of a hangover. You might think, I just drink. That's just what I do. That's how I have fun. Nope, you're an alcoholic and you hate something about your life. That's what's really going on. No matter how much you've sugar-coated it or candy-coated it, you have something wrong in your life. And we, hopefully, can find it. And I would say, if you have no idea what's wrong with your life, then that's fine. Let's just change everything about your life. Let's go off in a million weird directions and have fun. And eventually you will be so sidetracked by projects, right? What if I'll give you a weird one. What if you were great at working wood? It's a weird one. We don't do that anymore. But because we don't do it anymore, maybe you're really good at it. Maybe your genes and your family. Remember from my talent episode, maybe your family was a carpentry family and you don't realize it. By the time you start cutting up wood, you start seeing joints that that make more sense to you, and you start to look it up and find out that joint has existed for 1,000 years, and you thought of it because it was in your family genome for 10,000 years. You're a mason, you're a carpenter, you're something, right? And you get yourself a project, and it takes a long time to finish. But in the middle of that new project that you have, whatever the hell it is, you go back to your old regimen of drinking. And then on the same night that you engage in your drinking and you get yourself over any level of cognitive control, you try to engage your project and it doesn't work. And then you start to go, this sucks. I love my project. I love my project so much that I couldn't work on it when I drank too much or drank at all. And I love my project more than I like feeling bad. And all of a sudden, you say, all right, I'm going to work on my project more than I'm going to drink. You don't maybe even say that consciously, but you're like, look, I'm just going to postpone my drink because I got this project. Whatever the hell it is, right? It's a blog, for Christ's sake, whatever it is. And you just keep postponing the drink and postponing the drink to the point the drink starts to become this obstacle to your project, to this amazing thing in your life. And hell, maybe the project's just having a better time with your family. Maybe it's reading a story to your kid at night instead of tucking them into bed and hiding in a bottle the rest of the night. Whatever it is. I said in the description of my talents episode, the talents are the very future of our world. Warren Buffett came out, who's definitely on the inside trading envelope of the world. The guy knows what's going to happen on planet Earth, right? And he said, look, the only people that aren't going to get replaced by robots and computers are people with talents that robots and computers can't emulate. And we have tons and tons and tons of careers that cannot be interrupted by these two mechanical replacements. Creativity being one of them, of any sort, of any kind. You're not going to buy anything from a robot giving you a pitch as a salesman, right? Robots aren't going to go door to door selling, Gideon Bibles. It's never going to happen. Maybe they'll tuck one under your nightstand, but maybe that's a way to distract yourself away from it. But I think that the most evil thing about alcoholism is the utter denial that anyone is an alcoholic. They just simply don't want to know that they've slipped that much in life, right? My experience, again, an alcoholic will either do one of two things. In the rarer cases, they will become hermits and hide in a place where no one can see them drink. That's fairly rare in my experience. What I have experienced is that they surround themselves by people who also drink, by people who are also unhappy, and they share in their misery. And there's a reason why we try to make sure our children pick good friends, because we know that bad friends will lead our kids into really tough situations that might ruin their lives. But somehow, as adults, we write it off. In my life, I have simply said, enough is enough. Enough is enough. I won't deal with alcoholism. It doesn't matter how amazing a person is. They're not that amazing if they happen to crawl into a bottle as their refuge from life. And what's weirdly strange is the people that have done it in my life have been extremely capable people. But it's that expectation that wasn't set properly that got them started down this road. I know individuals who have become alcoholics because they married alcoholics. They married a whole family of alcoholics, and in order to blend in and be accepted by that family, they had to drink. And what they ended up finding out is they had that gene that allows them to metabolize alcohol better than most of us. And so each night that they would get drunk, they would be okay the next morning. No hangover whatsoever. So it just manifested until their kids started paying the price for their alcoholism. Scarring children. I know people, male and female, some that I've dated, that were utterly scarred into their own alcoholism because their parents were alcoholics. Being physically abused, being mentally abused, horrific things. They had to see things that no child should ever have seen. They had to experience things from their parents. Abuse, physical punching in the face abuse, because their parents were alcoholics. And I know that you guys have a million other stories that are way more intense than the ones I'm mentioning. So I guess the final chapter of this particular episode is, the problems of the world aren't all at the top of the pyramid. They come from the top of the pyramid, and they're not going to stop coming from the top of the pyramid until we have a big, big change. But these guys are so good at bullying the frog slowly that society may never wake up until there's a reset, until that bacteria that can't be fought by antibiotics, for all those who've abused antibiotics in their lifetime. Maybe that's how we wipe out 99% of this planet, and the ones that are left, well, who knows if they're docile or ass kickers. Who knows? But between now and then, in that that ridiculous hypothesis of a future. We have to deal with what's going on right now. And I think that, there's a great saying that things are tough all over. It was Cheech and Chong's third movie, right? Things are tough all over. And as lame as this is going to sound, that's the first time I ever heard that saying. I've heard life's a bitch and then you die, but that's so weird a say. It never really sunk in. But things are tough all over. Life is tough. And quite frankly, you can fall in love with tough. There's a lot of millionaires out there. There's even a Twilight Zone out there of a guy who had reached the apex of his life and his career. He owned the building that he was in downtown New York in this fictional Twilight Zone. And his janitor comes in to empty his trash. And he says, where are you from, man? And he says the town name. And he's like, that's funny. That's where I'm from, too. And he goes, isn't that weird that we've lived our whole life? We're both old men now. And he goes, every morning we put our pants on one leg at a time. And he goes something brilliant like, and from that point on in the day, our similarities end because I'm better than you. And the guy wishes himself back to his home. He signs a deal with the devil, Faustus plot line. This beautiful woman he signs this deal with, and he says, I want to go back to my hometown, back in the whatever the hell early years. I think it was even the first decade of the 19th century. And or the 20th century, excuse me. And he said, I want to know everything that I know now. I'll just invent everything and I'll tough it out again. And that's what he wanted. And of course, there's a bunch of clauses in the contract of which forbid him from actually pulling any of this off, even though he goes back in time. But I thought, in my time travel episode, I talk about that whole thing. If we want to make decisions over again, and we always romanticize the past as being a better time than it really was, even though it might have been great. But there was always hardships in every era that we've ever lived in. And now we just happen to have less distractions and more responsibility as we get older, No one is paying the bills besides us. We have to pay them all, right? At 40, it's much tougher to lose your job and get a new job. At 50, it's twice as hard. And at 60, it's 3 times as hard. And it starts to grind on the constitution of man. And that's why skills and talents that no one else has is the way to go. And I have worked in many technical institutions. I'll just give an example of what I see today. I've seen people well within their 40s who run IT departments, who work in IT departments. And when I come in from the outside with my ripe knowledge of everything that is in computers, and I start to have conversations with these individuals, and it becomes apparent that they haven't learned anything in 25 years. And they're unaware of why they're in the position that they're in, why they're terrified, why they know they can't lose their job. Hopefully they're protected such that they don't, but they're not learning new things, and they think that's going to pan out in the 21st century, and it won't. Now, as long as they hit no hardship, they're probably going to avoid any alcoholism, at least related to that issue. But most of us don't have that type of protection. We have to work really, really hard. And we have to flip the script on it being hard and being a detriment in our life to being an exciting thing. What you're afraid of, you have to dive right into. And not recess out of it saying, I have this thing I call the me no speak English defense. And I don't even mean it as an immigrant statement, but that's where you usually hear it. But it might be legitimate. Someone doesn't know the language of what you speak. But we do it to ourselves within the domesticated languages that we do know. We try to play stupid so other people have to do our job for us. And we don't attempt to learn what they are teaching us, right? So I always help friends with technical things, right? And there's some technical things I don't expect them to ever understand. And I wouldn't want them to waste their lives trying to learn that stupid stuff But then there's things that are day-to-day operations that they need to know. If you want to operate your television and watch TV, you got to learn how your TV works. If you want to operate your cell phone, you're going to have to learn how your cell phone works. You just have to. And I don't mind explaining it to you 2 or 3 times, but at least make the attempt to understand it for the rest of your life so that no one has to hand carry you through the basics of life. Because eventually I'm going to die. Eventually I might disappear out of your life and you're back to square one. And eventually there's not going to be anyone who wants to help you. They're going to be like, hey lady, hey dude, if you're not going to engage your own life, your own sustainability, then sorry. And then what happens if that person is addicted to alcohol at the same time? They just crawl deeper and deeper into the bottle. I think the number one thing I did for myself is simply to say I'm done with it. You know? If anybody wanted help from me in my personal circle with it, I'm right there. I'm there every single day, no matter how hard it is. As long as they wake up in the morning and they're like, you know, I need your help. I slipped last night, but I don't want to slip anymore. I'm there. But if someone's going to hide it from me or write it a blank check every single day, I got to go. I got to go. And I've had to say goodbye to some amazing people in my life because of alcohol, where damn near everything else was manageable, right? You could spend more time with the person and smooth out any sharp edges. But as long as alcohol is a giant part of the daily equation of life, it's the third act in the play, man, or the old film. It's the last act of where I'm going to spend my life being dragged down, you know. And I'm quicker on the draw now. So I wanted to get this particular subject out there. It's definitely one of those subjects I wish I would never feel the need to discuss, but I'm starting to see it, and I have seen it for the last 20 years, but in this day and age, again, you know, I got friends of mine who want to tell me how everyone's dying of cancer, multiple friends of mine, but when you tell them how to not catch it, or how to treat it once they catch it, they don't want to hear anything you have to say. Their ego, or their weak little souls, don't want to know that maybe they're doing things to create cancer in their own lives. And so they want to live in this perpetual denial that is fueled by alcoholism. But again, they want to be the first one on Facebook to say that somebody died. I had a weird one. I think I told you guys a few episodes ago. I had a buddy, or an acquaintance, I should say, that I had a lot of respect for and was actually looking forward to getting to know, who died in a car crash. And it was shocking, to say the least. Utterly shocking. Utterly devastating. This guy had retired out of being an Imagineer at Disneyland, had a great life ahead of him, incredible wife, who's also an Imagineer, and alcohol had nothing to do with these two at all. But I look at that loss and I think, Jesus, you know, we got to live every frickin' day of our lives to the fullest, right? We got to kill this thing. And someone could go to an extremist, you know, prohibition view of the whole thing. You know, our Muslim friends coming out of the Middle East don't drink alcohol, and if you let them take over your neighborhood, oh, there's going to be a lot less alcohol in your neighborhood, trust me. And they might chase you down just like they do gays and shoot you in the back of the head if you're a drunk because you're somehow disgracing Allah, right? I don't think full sobriety is necessarily the solution for everyone. I do hope that anyone suffering from this can experience sobriety for a short period of time at least. But I will say that, you know, the monsters and the demons that they've allowed to grow in their life, whether they be real or not real, will be very present in that first few days out of drinking. Just the fear alone of having to deal with the unknown, or dealing with the uncertainty, or dealing with the hurt that may have fueled it a long time ago, it'll be in the room with you. And that's when you need the support of people who are very close to you, who know what you're suffering from. You know, once you get really good at hiding alcohol, you get good at hiding anything, because it's not easy to hide alcohol. It's just not. You take a swig on a bottle of vodka or something, everyone smells it. You may not smell it yourself, but everybody does. If I walk into work with having smoked a cigar, I don't change my clothes or shower or brush my teeth, I'm kidding myself if people don't smell it on me. If I go make out with a girl, well then, no matter how much I do, if I smoke that day, she's going to have remnants of this coming through. Same thing with alcohol, right? I know you guys feel me. And I'm willing to bet that most of you have dealt with some form or fashion of this. If you're not directly involved with alcohol yourself and struggling with it yourself, which I hope you're not, you've probably met someone who has, or at least you've heard stories about it and how destructive it can be. We need to be, Mitch Hedgeberg said, he goes, they say alcohol is a disease, but it's the only disease you can get yelled at for having. And I think he made a really good point there. I would say this much just as a takeaway, obviously don't try to deal with an alcoholic when they're drunk. Don't try to deal with an alcoholic when they're recovering from it. If anything, if they lead into it and they say, look, I'm realizing how stupid this is, try not to just jump on the bandwagon and say, yeah, it is stupid and you're stupid for doing it. If anything, just simply say, well, let's go create a life where this stuff doesn't fit. Let's create a life that is so preoccupied with productivity and creativity, whatever that is, whether or not it pays the bills or not. I think it'd be better to be broke and happy and not an alcoholic than be rich and unhappy and be drinking constantly. I think most people can keep both, right? They can keep their wealth and their happiness and their jobs and have the hobby off to the side. Life is so infinitely dense in its possibilities. And most of us live our whole lives. And even if we're privileged enough to travel the entire world and see every nook and cranny, we can't take it with us. We still have to come home to wherever we live. And we have to bring things in the home that we can bring into the house. And I think that the consciousness of man is probably the greatest oasis that we have left. What if the world was a euphoric place and we didn't have boom or bust economies and lying politicians and educational systems that sucked? What if we had everything at our fingertips? We still could have bad expectations, which would draw us, right? The talents still need to exist. I mention it often, the third act of WALL-E, the little cartoon, computer rendered movie by Pixar. They tried to drive home what the euphoric world might look like at the end of that film, where everybody was super duper fat riding around on scooters and they had very little bones in their bodies because they didn't have to ever use their bones because they had these floating scooters. And I think that's a brilliant, brilliant part of that film that we all just overlooked. But that's what we would be headed to if we didn't say, in a blessed Star Trek world where there's no economy, it's just you do what you need to do and everything's taken care of for you. You still have to be interesting. Star Trek is a great example. The fictional series that started especially in Next Generations, where they actually started pushing forward the anatomy of the future. Picard would have to tell people from these new worlds that they live in a world without money. He still backs it up, and anyone who watches the Star Trek series, as silly as that example is, they have to go off and get a great education before they're accepted into the Starfleet Academy, and only a select amount get into the Starfleet, and only a select amount get into the Enterprise. And that's where our fictional story occurs in all the Star Trek series after 1987. They don't talk about it much in the 60s, right? It's just implied in the 60s. But all the other series had people that went off to become worthy of being on the Enterprise. And as new recruits would enter the Enterprise, they'd always roll the story forward, that theme of, you were a decorated kid in Starfleet. That's why you're allowed to come on the Voyager, Deep Space Nine, the Enterprise, both the old one and the new one. That's us, man. We got to do it. So, if you're raising kids, I would just simply say there's a time and a place to let them know that the world might be a little bit tough, but it's fun, I serendipitously found out that about the age of 13, I was raising myself. I had to make decisions for myself. And when my kid turned about 14, I told her the same thing. I said, at this point, your parents, one, you're going to start thinking we don't know anything. But before you get to that delusionary opinion of your parents, you need to understand that you're sort of responsible for yourself at this point. You can get into felony trouble at 14, easy, right? Before that, but definitely after 14. My kid started dabbling in booze. I told her, I said, just remember, I said, for the first 10 years of drinking booze, you're going to be trying to impress someone who doesn't exist that you can drink booze. I said, after that, it'll all calm down. So I said, be careful, but know the game. Know the game of what drinking is all about. It's bullshit. It's a rite of passage nowadays because we have no rites of passage. Drugs are a rite of passage. Oh man, you look how much blow I can do, or how much whatever the fuck I can do. Look how many beers I can drink. If you're still counting your beers to your buddies, you're well within the confines of the disease that is alcoholism, right? I'd say at that point, you haven't made the decision of whether or not you're going to be an alcoholic yet. And once you start hiding it, you are an alcoholic. Once you start getting routinely wasted after 40, you're an alcoholic. It doesn't mean everyone should abandon you. It just means you need help. And I guarantee you, I think that, again, 99.9% of man is it's a good, loving race that doesn't want any war in the world. We'd have no agendas to fight each other, right? There's a swab of the world that's being convinced and brainwashed that that's the case, but I think most of us don't want any of that. And the upshot of that is that there's essentially 99.9% of the people around you, if you're suffering from alcoholism, that want to help you. And if you have built a collection of friends around you that are alcoholics so that you may engage in alcoholism without any guilt, you probably need to schedule less time with them and schedule more time with people that have it under control. And you'll find that when you do have it under control, or when your friends have it under control around you, your ability to keep it under control increases dramatically. That's been my experience of ushering people out of this disease, right? It's only through accepting how tough it is. In fact, the person that I actually helped get out of it, obviously they made the decision in the end, not me. And they didn't go into a euphoric life after getting out of it, but they certainly didn't wake up with that horrible feeling. And now they suffer probably per capita more per second, but it's exciting to them because they realize that the place that they're suffering is their destiny. And I think hanging out with me, they realize that you do suffer and you do go through trials and tribulations and sacrifices to get what you want in life. It's just part of the process, right? Like I said in the talent episode, when you're down and out, man, when you've hit rock bottom, the beautiful thing is there's only one place to go. So if you were to wake up and say, oh my God, my life completely sucks, and every measurable avenue of my existence, it sucks, well, then that's the good news, because you've hit rock bottom and nothing goes any lower than where you are. And so you can bounce up, but reach out for help. Reach out for help from friends, and if you know someone that you can just coexist with, and maybe, they're pounding the booze in front of you and you just simply do one or two or none. If you do none, you're probably going to get an enemy. That's what I discovered in dating alcoholic within last year. If I didn't order a drink, you get that whole "you're an asshole" thing. Because they think you're immediately judging them because they're projecting their fear of being judged for drinking, right? If you want to hang out with an alcoholic, then you need to be the most masterful chess player. But just like the slogan of the show, learn the rules that rule you. You need to learn all the rules of an alcoholic if you want to play the chess game, because it's a chess game called alcoholism. And there's very few rules on the board, but if you don't know what the rules are, if you don't know how the pawn moves, the knight moves, the bishop moves, or the queen moves, you won't be able to play the game with them. You won't be able to influence their minds in a way that they're unaware of you influencing them. But living by example is, quite frankly, the best solution I can give you. And I think it's surfacing the conversation of difficulty of the struggle of life. Once you surface the fact that you're struggling with these things, then this misnomer that the alcoholics have that says everyone else's life is easier than mine, and I'm drinking because I have been dealt a bad deck of cards or bad hand of cards, right? And this is just the way I have to deal with it because no one else is dealing with this like I am. They don't have the same trials and tribulations that I have, the suffering that I have. And there are definitely acute moments of trauma that happen. And it's tough to deal with those moments, but you have to go out and get your support group. You know, when someone passes away in the world early, it could be devastating. My buddy who passed away, he has a wife. He's very young, and he's my age, has her whole life ahead of her, and now she won't have her best friend. But everyone's coming out of the woodworks to support this person. And I don't think she has any drinking issue whatsoever. But regardless, she could have one if she didn't deal with it, right? I had a buddy of mine who lost his daughter very early in her life, his first child, due to an accident. And he was very upfront with me that it almost killed him. He already had more kids he needed to take care of, but it just devastated him personally. And, it doesn't matter if anybody tells you, oh, well, they didn't feel any pain when they passed away. The fact is they're not here. And you were supposed to raise them, and you were supposed to protect them as a parent. That's what you feel. But life has a way of equalizing any intent that you have, right? It certainly doesn't mean that we fail because these things happen around us. They just happen. But I know you feel me. And I know that a lot of you have a hell of a lot more experience in this than I do. I just wanted to scratch the surface of this so that we could maybe affect at least one person's life and make it better. Or affect your own life. Who knows? I'm just one dude with some opinions. This has been a deep thought about a very deep subject. And as always, I wish you the very, very best with all things in life. And again, I pray to whatever supreme force might exist in this universe that at least one of these episodes touches somebody. And if nothing else, just distracts you from bad habits, There's a lot of life to live, my friends. Let's go out and find out whatever it is that's our slice of life. If you haven't already, go to mkulturaradio.com. That's where you can find the feeds to make all this happen, no matter what avenue you're reaching this show by. If you made this far, I really appreciate you listening, always. If you haven't subscribed. If you haven't liked, like. It helps the stuff get discovered by other people. We always welcome the comments. Our comments are much more plentiful now. We had some people, it was very interesting. We had a comment, and this is the episode I'm going to do in the future is called Pandering. And, there has been some insinuations that we're pandering to create more traffic by covering things like flat earth, and nothing could be further from the truth. You might think someone's pandering until you try to sit in front of a camera for an hour and a half and talk about something. You have to have a devout interest in something to make these shows. You absolutely have to. And if you think there's any exception to that rule, try it sometime. As I always say, this isn't about me. I don't introduce myself, right? There's so many channels on YouTube that I follow. In the first 5 seconds, it's all, how you doing? Welcome to the show. My name is this, and ... And in the end, they're building their own identity, their own brand online. I could give a shit if you know who I am. It doesn't matter. If what I say is effective for your life or interesting to you in any way, shape, or form, then I've done my job. I'm hoping that I am just a single point of starting out conversations that then blossom. I influence 2 people to talk about it. They get 2 people to talk about it, and there's some fission, explosion of conversation and consciousness in the universe that we can get these undiscussed topics out there in a way that is softer and nicer and more productive than I think some of the knee-jerk responses that we have to these subjects, such as flat Earth. Of course it's round. Well, how do you know it's round? Have you been in space? It appears that NASA's never been in space. Didn't need agree to take a picture of the Earth. Well, that's why we're going to talk about it. I know most of you don't have that opinion. If you reach the end of this broadcast, you're not that kind of person. But anyway, I'm going to sign off here. Let's take care of our friends that are suffering from this disease. If you're suffering from it, I'm hoping that something here jostled your brain things are tough all over. We're all struggling. And I think that most of us are empathetic and sympathetic to your situation. Everybody wants to help, you know. And just remember, it's a big planet. There's a tremendous, infinite density of experiences that you can have on this planet. If you don't like your circle of activities, then just change them. Have a blast. And you're not going to like them all. But when you find the one that you love, my God, it'll change your life forever. And it'll erase the bad habits out of your life, I think. Maybe it'll make some new ones. And you can get rid of those too. That's just life, right? Anyway, as you know, I want you to go take care of yourself and somebody else. Let's try to make things a happier place. And I'll see you in the next episode. Over now.